Do you want to discover more joy, peace, and freedom with food, exercise, and your body? Here we bring a compassionate, holistic, and sustainable approach to fitness so you can fully enjoy the life you want and express your unique self with the world. I'm Michelle Roscoe, and I want to help you find fitness freedom. I'm so glad you're here. So this podcast is called Fitness Freedom. Freedom with food, exercise, and your body, and from that to experience full freedom in your life. So what is freedom? How do we find freedom? And I've talked about this in other episodes, but I want to give a different angle here and even be a little personal about myself and my experiences and how you might be able to relate and what it means for you. But you got to stick around till the end to get to that point. So let's go on a little adventure together, okay? This past week I've been reading this book called 10X. It's by Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy. It's a business book. Most of my books that I read fall into nutrition, fitness, money, business, self-help, all that stuff. That's what I'm interested in, mostly nonfiction. And it's talking about how 10xing your business or 10xing your results is easier than 2xing and how it forces you to expand. And one of the chapters I was reading, I had my book with me and I was sitting by the lake. It was an exceptionally warm day this past weekend and it was beautiful. I let my skin absorb the sun, and I was reading about this section on unique ability and how you're not meant to just do better, but to be different and unique. And I was thinking about what that is. I had some ideas floating in my mind, and I don't know if this is my unique ability, and I don't know if you just have one. And maybe that's a great question for you to think about too. What is your unique ability? What sets you apart from everyone else? Like, what are your gifts? Things that might come easily, things that drive you that you might not even be aware of, but you can take some time to think, what is your unique ability? Something that is your unique essence or blueprint. All of our DNA is completely different, no matter, even if you're an identical twin, there are differences that you own between you and your twin. So that can be your superpower. So of course I want to know my superpower. So I was thinking about this and I was thinking, is it to see what is, to see the truth? I had kind of like a light bulb got up from my lying position. Okay, I think it is to see truth, to see what is. That's ever since I was young. I've had this desire to know what truth is, to know the underlying principles and fundamentals behind why we do what we do. And I've noticed how in my life I've taken what I believe to be true, maybe some hypotheses or theories, and applied it to different situations. And if it doesn't apply to all situations, then it's not that fundamental truth, we'll say. I know truth can be a convoluted word, but that's what I can access most easily right now to describe what I'm speaking of. So to see truth. And in some ways, I have had an advantage in this way. And I'm not saying that I'm always right. I know I'm not always right. I absolutely know. I mean, life has given me lessons, like slaps in the face, like, hey, this is not true. So I know I'm not saying I'm infallible. I'm not saying that I'm always right. But I have this strong desire that drives me to seek what is true. And this is a lot of my work, and the 4-H method and what I do is centered around this desire. It springs from this desire. Like, hey, why is this working for some people and it's not working for other people? What is the common denominator here? How can we universally approach fitness in our bodies in a way that's joyful? Like, what is the underlying truth and all that? Yeah, so it does definitely inform my work. But this desire has driven me, and I think I have, in some ways, both disadvantages and advantages. So growing up, I felt, if I look back on myself as a kid, I can see myself kind of like an observer, watching what was going on around me and trying to understand what was happening. And I want to take a little bit of a side note here because I want to share this partly for myself and also for you if you might be able to relate, and to give you some comfort in knowing that you're not alone, and even a feeling of safety in connecting with me here. And it might not be, I doubt it's the exact same situation. I think, yeah, but you might be able to relate to parts of this. So, and I do want to disclaim that I am not bashing on anyone in specific. I am not, I'm not saying this from an angry, bitter place. I'm saying this from an enlightened, understanding, and healing place. So I think my advantages were that, one, I grew up in a Christian home, and to be more specific, independent fundamental Baptist. If you know what that is, you know what I'm saying, and if you don't, you can look it up. It is, I guess, a sect or a cult underneath Christianity that's pretty extreme. And I grew up in that religion from when I was born. I believe my first Sunday, or my second Sunday, I was in church, and I went multiple times every week. I even lived by a church, in a church, for about half of my life. So I'm not just saying, yeah, I went to church casually on Sundays or we went on holidays. It was like my whole life was the church. I also had the advantage, disadvantage of growing up in a multicultural home. My mother is South Korean and my father is American, and I am an American citizen. Don't get it twisted. One of the most offensive things you could say to someone who grew up in America, and they might look different, is to say, wow, you speak English really well. So please don't ever say that to me. I grew up around in different places. I grew up in America, we moved to Korea when I was like about halfway through my childhood. And another element is I was military. My dad was in the Army when I grew up, and we served, quote unquote, the military community in our church. So I was surrounded most of my life by the U.S. military culture. So different niches here, different circles, and maybe you can relate to one or some of those. Another thing is I was homeschooled for my entire life. My older sister, she went to school for a few years in her education, and my younger sister and I were both homeschooled our entire lives. So we have these different categories, right? And when you have those different categories, when you feel like you're different from other people for whatever reasons, it's almost like you can look in from the outside and almost see, like, what are all these people doing? What's driving them? What's different here? What's the same here? I also spent about 2 years of my young childhood, traveling around the States. So I've been to most of the 50 states, I would say 40 out of 50. And we went to various churches around the States, gathering support. So I've met probably more people than most in my life, especially with that military church. People were coming and going all the time. And I've traveled around a lot and moved in different places as an adult. So I've encountered lots of cultures, and not to say that more than anyone. I know that there are people who've traveled more than I have, and you might have that experience as well, you listening to this. But there's an advantage to being able to be in different spheres, be around different types of people, and you realize pretty early on that everyone thinks that their way is the way, and then you go somewhere else and it could be completely different, and they think their way is the way. So both of them aren't right. It's their way, but it's not the way for everyone, right? And so you start to think, okay, what is underneath that? What is underneath that? What is underneath that? And I had to, from the world that I grew up in my 20s, after I left my Bible college and quote unquote entered the real world, I had to relearn a lot of how people work. And that was something that I had to do in my 20s, and I've had to learn it since. So there was a lot of observation, a lot of chameleon-ishness, like where I had to learn how to fit in, where I learned how people operate. And in order to connect with them, I knew I had to meet them where they were rather than where I was. Because if I were to explain myself and be myself, they wouldn't understand. And I learned that pretty quickly. So I had to learn how to almost be a chameleon, not to be an authentic, but just, oh, they see things this way, so I'm going to relate to them by saying this way. And I still do it. I still feel like these parts of my upbringing, most, if not anyone in my life, can really relate to maybe more than one or two of these different spheres. And that's okay. I mean, it can be lonely, but I also embrace who I am. And one thing that you see is that in each culture, in different places, people have specific standards for what things should look like boxes to tick. Say, for example, I haven't lived in the Midwest until about 3 years ago. I moved from South Korea. I was living in Busan, South Korea, teaching English there, then started my business there and brought my business with me. And for the first time, I've lived in the Midwest. And it had been a while since I'd lived in America. I'd made visits, but not lived like as a full-time citizen in America. And there are things that stand out to me, even if you're listening from America, or maybe if you're curious about American culture, at least for where I am. One thing that stands out is the importance that is placed on home ownership, the importance that is placed on marriage, and that whole process of you get a boyfriend or girlfriend, you get engaged, you get married, you buy a house, you have kids, you have a dog or a pet. Those kind of like steps that people take here, that kind of surprised me as a cultural thing. And there's this idea of, I mean, people, I meet people and I know people who've lived in one place, or pretty much in one place, and grew up there, and they have close ties to family and home and relatives and all that. And there's a sense of safety there that I'm almost jealous of, and a sense of connectedness that I definitely don't have in my life with the people you grow up with. And there's also a sense of, that's just the way it is. This is how it's done. It's always been done this way. This is all I know, I'm familiar with, and continuing in that way. And again, being on the outside of this and having left how I grew up, having lost family members because of me being myself, whether that's being queer or through other reasons, leaving the church I grew up in. Things aren't just the way it is for me. I've had to consciously create my life. And I see that just again as a disadvantage. It's difficult and it's not easy. There's a lot of unknowns. But I also see it as an advantage because I know that I get to create my life. And I know that the way I grew up or the way anyone grows up, is not the absolute truth. And I feel like I'm skirting around this. I'm looking at my notes and I have this one sentence about something I want to dive into that feels a little bit scary, but I think it's right. So this past week, I've been processing a lot of my upbringing and, without going into much detail, abuse and trauma. And I've been watching almost a search for maybe finding some other people who could relate to me or whom I could relate to. I searched like religious cults, and something about them is oddly comforting because it helps me realize the degree to which I've grown and the severity of the beliefs that I grew up with, and almost giving myself some compassion and credit for that. So I found this documentary called Let Us Pray, and it came out a couple years ago or last year. It's specifically about the religious sect that I mentioned earlier that I grew up in. And it's largely about sexual abuse that went on for in different churches for these different women who bravely spoke up and share their experiences in this documentary. I have one more episode to go, but it's been extremely enlightening. And for example, just to bring this home about how much, coming out of where I grew up in, the beliefs that I grew up in were around based on the Bible and the King James Version in specific, which is 1611, and that is the Word of God. It's infallible, and it's direct, and it's literal. And a lot of the verses there, and of course, same idea. People believe this is the way, whenever it's their way, and they can make interpretations to make it work for them. And again, I'm not bashing anyone in specific. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just talking about what my experience is. And some people honestly do deserve some bashing, but that's not what I'm doing here. So that was the culture I grew up in. I've memorized books of the Bible. I've memorized so many verses, and in the King James Version. So I internalized it from a young age. And a lot of what I want to pinpoint is the abusive culture that promotes basically abuse, especially of children and women, where men are in power, especially those in leadership in the church. They're a direct line from God, and they say what is truth, and they are not to be questioned. And something that I grew up with, and this has a lot to do with body and body image, and I've learned as I've grown up that it's not just this religion. Even like in politics, it's coming up in America, this binary between who gets to choose what you do with your body. And in the church I grew up with, women were both shamed for their bodies. They were to be saving themselves from marriage, as were men. But there was this idea that men were out of control, that they had like a beast inside that they had to control. And women were also responsible for keeping that beast tamed by how they dressed. So there was a lot of hiding your body, literally. I grew up where I was not allowed to wear pants after childhood. From about 10 on, I did not wear pants until after I left college. So for 10 years, I wore skirts and dresses and pantyhose. And that's why you will rarely see me in a skirt or pants, and never, ever, ever in pantyhose. Oh, ugh. And modesty was preached because it's underlyingly the woman's responsibility for men's choices, which is a wonderful breeding ground for rape and abuse. And that's what this whole documentary was revealing. Things get hidden because marriage is the end-all be-all, sanctified by God. So if there is abuse happening in a marriage, typically by a man to a woman, she's supposed to be a good wife and just pray for her husband and stay with him because that's God's will. And I could go into more detail, and I'm not. I'm avoiding that right now, but I'm avoiding going more vulnerably into this. But just to give you an idea, and then that caused a lot of harm for me in the choices that I made and the places that I was in that made me vulnerable to abusers. And thankfully Thankfully, I'm not there now. But that is the environment I grew up in, and I'm still acknowledging it and naming it as it was abusive and healing from it and just recognizing it. And it's taken years. It's taken years to make those shifts, to make those connections, and to be more and more myself. And I'm still figuring it out. When you have this idea of that's just the way it is, it can stifle possibilities and minimize dreams, because certainty is comforting. Certainty is comforting. It's not safe. It's comforting. The familiar is comforting. And sometimes it is easier to rely on, that's just the way it is, than it is to venture out into trusting yourself and creating new ways of being. And in my search for truth and finding the common denominators, what I've had to learn is to trust myself. And I do think that I have a good read on people. I feel like I can read energies pretty well if I can just tap into how it feels beyond my brain. I feel like I have a good bullshit radar. And of course, some of that is informed by my past, and I'm not always accurate, but I'm learning to trust myself and feeling into what is. And when we want to grow and we want to find freedom, we have to be willing to some degree to let go of the idea of that's just the way it is. And sometimes we're forced into that through difficult circumstances, and sometimes we can just choose. I saw some video today by Jane Goodall, and she was talking about how one time she was in the jungle and a beautiful fly came up onto her knee, and she looked at it and her brain went immediately to, this is a fly. And then she recognized that she was labeling it, and she wanted to experience the beauty of this fly without the labels. So she just saw it as it was, this beautiful creature that was sitting on her knee in the middle of this beautiful jungle and feeling connected to everything. And if we want to see truth, again, I'm using that word, if we want to see truth, if we want to see what is, we have to be able to release labels and be present to what is actually happening, not just in our brains and what our brains are doing about what is going on or categorizing things. And we have to open ourselves to a beginner's mind. We have to be willing to see things differently, to let go of boxes and labels. And to understand who you are, and I'm going back to the beginning, your unique ability and your unique essence, really, like not even your ability, but just who you are. You have to be willing to let go of those things. And this is why in my work in the 4-H method, we do a lot of work around this, around removing labels and what we know, our rules, around exercise, around food. And it can be scary. But when you can let go of those boxes and let go of those rules, let go of those labels, you're able to see yourself and you're able to connect with you. And that's the most important connection you can make. You with you. And it can be scary. It's absolutely terrifying. It's new territory. The unknowns are scary. Not knowing exactly what your next step is and not relying on, oh, this is just the way that we've been doing it, so we're just going to keep doing it. That can be scary. But that is how you create your dreams. That is how you tap into new possibilities. And that is how you grow. And that is how you really live. What would it be like for you, my friend, to suspend what you know, to suspend the idea that's just the way it is in your life, in your relationship with your body, in your relationship with food and exercise and fitness and health and all that entails? What would it be like to suspend that certainty and to see what really is? It could be scary, and what you uncover could be absolutely beautiful. So there's always a choice, autopilot or adventures. And I don't think I'm going to go into autopilot anytime soon. I think I'm going to keep choosing adventures, including this adventure of where I am right now in both my personal life and my business. I'm smiling right now. I hope you choose adventures. I hope that you become willing to see what is, what truly is, to open yourself to possibilities and dreams, to remove the labels, to be present, to connect with yourself, to maybe even become a beginner again, and open to all the good things, even if it's scary, that are waiting for you. Hey, you reached the end of this episode. Thank you so much for your time and energy listening to this. I appreciate it so much. If you would be so kind and generous as to leave a positive review for this podcast, it would mean so much to the growth of this so that more people can benefit from it. And even more, it would mean even more if you shared this personally with someone who you think would be able to benefit from this, who would appreciate and enjoy it. Please do that. Always feel free to reach out to me with questions or comments, michelle@mlroscoe.com, or you can find me on Instagram at michelleroscoe. Always happy to hear from you. And if you're ready to commit, to take action, to making your healthiest life from a place of already enough, join the 4-H method. Make your body your home, your health, your hero journey. The link is in the show notes. Like you, love you, Coach Michelle.